Research that aims to reduce the use of animals in scientific experiments is to get a significant boost today. A series of grants totalling almost £5 million are going to be handed out. The funding's for new testing methods, the development of new technologies as well that will reduce, refine or replace the use of laboratory animals, so-called 3Rs. At the same time, though, animal experiments in the UK are on the increase. They were up 8% in 2012. So what's going on? We'll talk to the head of the National Centre for the Replacement, Refinement and Reduction of Animals in Research in a moment. First, though, our science correspondent, Tom Fielden.
Here we have our incubator with the air circulating through in a sterile way.
The Professor of Stem Cell Science at Queen Mary's University, London, Ian MacKenzie, shows me around his labs at the Blizard Institute in Whitechapel.
And the cells are put in there in a nutrient medium, like a sort of soup, and they grow there quite happily.
Professor MacKenzie specialises in the basic biology of cancer, and as such you might expect his laboratory to be tucked quietly away in a high-security facility, with much of the space given over to housing the main experimental tool for all oncology, the captive-bred and increasingly genetically modified laboratory mouse. It is in a basement, but this bright, airy laboratory is flanked not by cages, but by fridges full of Petri dishes.
I'm a cancer researcher, and the traditional model for testing drugs which have been used for cancer therapy is to use a mouse. But recently there have been great advances made in the laboratory in growing cancer cells in dishes, and I think it's got to the stage where in many situations this provides a much more accurate model than the mouse.
It's to take this research to the next level, modelling the development of cancer in 3 dimensions in the lab, that Professor MacKenzie's team has won a £350,000 project funding grant from the National Centre for the 3Rs, one of 20 awards totalling £4.8 million announced today that aim to replace, refine or reduce the use of animals in scientific experiments.
So clearly the headline figure that you're all going to have noticed.
But if all that sounds like unalloyed good news, it stands in marked contrast to the latest figures for the overall use of animals in medical experiments, which rose by 8% to a total of 4.1 million in 2012.
And that sounds like a very dramatic increase, but I want to give a little bit of context.
The main increase in animal numbers is accounted for by the breeding of genetically modified mice.
On hand to help the Home Office's Dr. Judy MacArthur-Clarke square this apparent circle was the Royal Veterinary College's Head of Translational Medicine, Professor Dominic Wells.
And the other element is that we are doing more biomedical research at the moment. We all adhere to the principle of the 3Rs. We try to reduce animal numbers, we try to refine the models, we try and replace them wherever possible. But because we are doing more research and more research closer to the clinic, we're ending up using more animals in total.
This rise in numbers is absolutely unacceptable, especially set against a government pledge to reduce them.
But the Chief Executive of the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, Michelle Few, is not convinced.
The reality is that the toll has risen to over 4 million animals this year, and that's absolutely shocking. And we've seen the government fail for the 3rd successive year on its pledge to reduce the numbers of animals in experiments. So that's the overall context. We're not seeing these numbers going down. We're seeing a year-on-year increase. Simply unacceptable.
Currently in the United Kingdom we use close to 500,000 mice a year testing and developing cancer drugs.
Certainly, Ian MacKenzie hopes his research could help to put a significant dent in those annual statistics.
Appropriate development of new laboratory tests which are effective and meaningful could reduce the number of animals used by half.
That really would be quite a dramatic impact on the figures, wouldn't it?
It would have advantages for the mice, but it would also have a lot of advantages for people, because this could actually increase the rate at which we develop drugs, and that would be in itself very valuable.
That report was from Tom Fielden. The National Centre for the Replacement, Refinement and Reduction of Animals in Research is an independent scientific organisation. They're mainly government funded. Vicky Robinson is its head and is here. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Just dealing with the increase in numbers, first of all. This is because of genetic modification.
That's correct. The number of genetically modified mice has been increasing over the last 5 or 6 years, so the increase was expected.
And but nonetheless, I mean, as we were hearing in that piece, to a lot of people it is simply wrong. In fact, it's going back on a promise that the government made. Is it likely to alter that that change soon? I mean, are we likely to see a reduction in numbers soon?
Well, I think the number would be much higher if it hadn't been for the work of the National Centre. And I think what we've really got to do is look beyond that headline figure, because what it doesn't show is the huge amount of work that scientists funded by the NC3Rs are doing to find alternatives to using animals. And the new grants that we're announcing today are part of that national effort to really drive forward the availability of alternatives.
But, I mean, can you measure the suffering of these animals? For instance, in the increase in genetically modified animals, what proportion of them are suffering some kind of symptom as well, some kind of effect as well from what's happening to them? Do we have any idea? Does anyone measure it even?
So people are required, scientists are required to look at the welfare of the animals, and we have a huge programme trying to improve the welfare of genetically modified animals, and in fact all animals that are used in research. It's a very important area. It's quite difficult to get a handle on the level of suffering, and one of the issues is we still don't know very much about what animals experience in terms of pain and suffering. So we're putting investment into trying to find objective measures, for example, objective measures of pain, so that you can begin to ensure that you're definitely ameliorating any signs of suffering.
If we reduce the numbers now, what effect would it have on medical research?
Well, I think for the foreseeable future, animals will continue to be an extremely important part of medical research.
But if we didn't use them, what difference would it make?
Well, I think there's increasing evidence that actually animals will not provide all of the solutions for medical research, that many treatments that are developed using labs simply do not translate in the clinic.
Yeah.
So there's a real opportunity here.
Well, that was an interesting part of that report, wasn't it? One of the scientists there saying actually it's more accurate not to use animals.
That's
Given
correct.
that is the case, why do we have these figures going up?
So the Home Office statistics were never intended to provide a metric of efforts to replace and reduce the use of animals in research. Scientists who use animals are required to record the number they use, and the Home Office collate and publish that. Now, scientists who are using fewer animals or no animals as a result of the work of the National Centre don't have to tell the Home Office how many animals that they would have used if it weren't for the fact that they're now using alternatives. So I think that's why I'm saying you have to look beyond that headline, because you don't count what you don't use. Now, that's not to say that we don't take evaluation extremely seriously. We do. We know from our own evaluation metrics that our work will have an impact on thousands and thousands of animals.
And you believe your work is working in the sense that there is a wider awareness, a greater awareness in the scientific community of the need, as people would see it, to reduce the use of animals where possible.
In my experience, there are hundreds of scientists, not only in universities, but in companies, pharmaceutical companies, for example, committed to reducing and replacing the use of animals. It's an ambitious and challenging goal.
Vicky Robinson, thank you very much.